Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of Judicial Education Week 2023. Thank you all again for joining us. This morning's presentation is on blockchain and cryptocurrency, and we're very pleased to have with us Mrs. Andrea Martin-Swaby. Mrs. Andrea Martin-Swaby is the current Acting Senior Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions in her native Jamaica, and has been a senior member of the management team at the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions since 2015. She holds a Master of Laws in Computer and Communications Law. She leads the Cybercrimes and Digital Forensic Unit at the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Her full bio has been shared with you in the program for today's events. So without further ado, I introduce Ms. Andrea Martin-Swaby, who will lead us in a very informative presentation on blockchain and cryptocurrency. Good morning, Ms. Martin-Swaby. I hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Firstly, might I acknowledge the Chief Justice of the Turks and Caicos Island and all the judges, members of the private bar and public bar. Thank you very much to the Chief Justice for inviting me once again to deliver a presentation. And I hope that you will find it to be very meaningful and useful this morning. So I will attempt to share my screen at this time. Okay. Go right up to the top. And I trust everyone is able to see my screen. Okay. So this morning, I'm going to look at blockchain and cryptocurrencies. And interestingly, this will be the first presentation that I will do on the topic, having completed my thesis actually in looking at blockchain and cryptocurrencies from the perspective of the intended or imminent introduction of trading in cryptocurrencies on the stock exchange here in Jamaica. And so in light of that move by the JSE here, I thought it was important to explore what the anti-money laundering framework should look like in Jamaica to facilitate such an introduction of those new technological products within our country. So this morning, and seeing that we're looking at the Turks and Caicos Islands, I did a little research and I tried to see what was the primary medium of exchange in the Turks and Caicos. My research has revealed that in the TCI, the primary medium of exchange consists of United States dollars. And I wanted to start here because when we discuss blockchain and cryptocurrencies, it's always a discussion that involves, is it money? Is it not money? What would be needed or what would be necessary for cryptocurrencies to be elevated to the status where it can be considered to be money or a primary or medium of exchange? Now, what is money? And we always have to start here. And as judges, as members of the private bar, public bar, we all engage in commerce in some way or another. We all seek to exchange goods and services, and there must be a medium or that middle, well-recognized medium of exchange that is acceptable by society. And so research shows that money is actually primarily a social institution. And so it evolves to meet the needs of society as the latter evolves. And a perfect example is when we look at cryptocurrencies, the most popular of which is Bitcoin. Certainly 30 years ago, before you had such a transformation in e-commerce, there would not have necessarily been the need for any discussions concerning the emergence of a new form of exchange, such as cryptocurrencies. And as we go through the presentation, I'm going to seek to assist in defining cryptocurrencies. Sometimes it seems like a daunting topic, but we're going to try and unpack it and see if together we can have an appreciation of what this new phenomenon is. So this that I've taken here concerning money being a social institution, actually, I have taken it from the European Central Bank in an article titled Virtual Currency Schemes, where they sought to discuss what is this new phenomenon that is emerging. And so when we discuss money, we always go back to the basics. We always go back to the historical perception and acceptance of different commodities as money. During the very earlier centuries, money consisted of gold, cattle, seeds, silver, whatever commodity within the community that the community accepted as being a valuable good or commodity that could be used to exchange for different items, etc. That is what was accepted by the community and by the society. But then it's important for us to have some sort of a synergy or uniformity in terms of what is the accepted means of exchange. And so you'll realize that as it evolved, you then had commodity-backed money. So what that means is that you had gold certificates, and then today we still have what is categorized as fiat money. So currently, wherever you go in the world, or in most places in the world, you'll see that the primary medium of exchange is what is categorized as fiat money, which is backed by their central government. So the entire distribution process and settling of transactions is all done by a central authority. And I know I have mutual legal assistance practitioners here. So when I say central authority, not talking about the designated central authorities or so for the purpose of mutual assistance, but the central government that would back whatever is categorized as the primary medium of exchange. But certainly over the past 15 years or so, you see the emergence of a new form of commodity-backed money. And I say backed in quotations, and I want to put that quotations there because cryptocurrencies, which is an entirely technological creature, appears to be potentially being able to rise to the standard of being an accepted medium of exchange. I will not say primary at this stage, but I'll say accepted medium of exchange. So in defining money, you look at how money functions. And during the presentation, I'll try to see, can this new phenomenon of cryptocurrency fit within the ambits of the functions of money traditionally? So money primarily is a medium of exchange. It's used as the intermediary in trade to avoid the inconvenience of a barter system, because with barter, my need would have to find that person who wants to exchange that good for my need. So there needs to be some sort of similar need or similar wants that exists between the trader and the trade, yes, whatever that one is. So in the barter system, there was a need for a coincidence of wants between two parties to the transaction. To take out that difficulty of finding the coincidence of wants, then you put what is classified as money as the middleman. Money also functions as a unit of account. So it is a standard numerical unit for the measurement of value and cost of goods, services, assets, and liabilities. So you can use it to measure value. Also, and importantly, money operates as a store of value. That is, it can be saved and retrieved in the future. And so when we discuss things like store of value, issues such as volatility in terms of the value of the currency is very important. And even though I'm going to go into it further in the presentation, but when it comes to fiat currency, because it is backed by a government, it is managed by a government. And so therefore, the government also will step in if it is that the fiat currency is losing its value rapidly. You'll see that there are exchange controls and those things that are put in place. So because the government stands behind the fiat money, it is able to retain its value. But then a Roman jurist, that is Mr. Polius, said this, and it's important for our discourse this morning. The designation pecunia, or money, does not only include coinage, but includes every kind of medium of exchange or pecunia. That is every substance. So money is not to be limited to what you say today is fiat currency backed by a government. It continues to evolve with society in the same way we moved from corn, grain, gold, cattle to fiat currency. Believe that money will continue to evolve, especially with new technological products that are available that may be capable of operating as a medium of exchange, may be capable of operating and functioning as a unit of account, and may be capable as operating and functioning as a store of value. So when we analyze the statement made by Polius, my argument is that because the concept of money was never intended to be limited to notes and coins, in fact, in the early days, there was no such thing as notes and coins. So there can be no, what should I say? There can be no closing of the door to how money may potentially evolve further. But it extends to other mediums of exchange. The determining factor of what will constitute money will be the social acceptance of such pecunia rather than the form of pecunia. And when I did my research on Turks and Caicos, I did find that persons can purchase Bitcoins in Turks and Caicos. And therefore, what that shows is that there is also an evolution taking place in the TCI in terms of what can be considered to be mediums of exchange. And as judges and practitioners, you may wonder, why do I need to know about this? The emergence of new technologies and new forms of electronic commerce will have an impact, one, on the types of criminality we may see, and it may have an impact or will have an impact on our regulatory framework, certainly in respect of anti-money laundering and counterterrorism financing. And so as we go through the presentation today, those are two very important areas that I will want to touch on. So we've said that the determining factor of what will constitute money is the social acceptance of the pecunia. So what is the strength of the fiat currency? Yes, social acceptance is important because it must be that the medium of exchange has gathered the support of the society so that society will utilize it as a medium of exchange. But the real strength of the fiat currency outside of acceptance is the backing and support of a central government. And that is the critical pillar on which the confidence in fiat lies. As we go into cryptocurrencies and blockchain, we're going to realize that the central government has been moved entirely outside of the transaction process. And we look at what is the implication or what are the implications for this. So we're still on the societal role of money. And I looked at Joanna Perkins in an article where she looked at money from the view of the confidence of the society. She said the negotiability of notes and coins flow directly from the acceptance by society as a method of payment for goods and services. And she says this is a societary theory of money. Can cryptocurrencies become money? Would the law recognize cryptocurrencies as money if it becomes possessed of a face value, if it is widely accepted as a means of exchange for different properties, notwithstanding that it has not been issued by a sovereign government and given such designation as a unit of sovereign currency? And I want to pause here. Cryptocurrencies are entirely different from our electronic commerce or e-money. So today we use credit cards, we use debit cards, we use checks, we use wire transfers, we use all sorts of different, we have PayPal, different electronic payment methods, but all of that is still fiat money. All of that is still backed by a central government somewhere. Cryptocurrencies now will never, well, I don't want to say will never, but I think it would be very difficult for anyone to control cryptocurrencies because of how the technology works. But let me never say never. I've learned not to do that. But cryptocurrencies nowhere in the near future will, in my view, be supported and issued by a government or issued by a government and managed and controlled by a sovereign government. So what are the features of fiat currency that will now bring into focus the new phenomena of cryptocurrencies? As I said before, all transactions are settled through an intermediary, usually in the form of a bank or financial institution, or what they call a clearinghouse. In Jamaica, that's the central bank, the Bank of Jamaica. I'm not certain in respect of the Turks and Caicos Islands what institution may function as the clearinghouse. The bank or financial institution in fiat currency acts as a trusted third party in the transaction. So the central government, the central bank, is the trusted third party that is between the vendor and the purchaser. And it operates as the clearinghouse for all transactions, save and except, of course, cash. Now, as I said before, it's the same for electronic payment systems, which are backed by fiat currency. So Nakamoto, which we believe is a pseudonym, nobody knows who or what is behind the most popular of cryptocurrencies, which is Bitcoin. But Nakamoto did a white paper, I think it was in 2009. And Nakamoto, in his paper, introduced Bitcoin as being the first of many cryptocurrencies that would be emerged. In introducing Bitcoin, it was a criticism and what I would say a challenge posed to traditional methods of payments, including e-commerce. In Nakamoto's white paper, he said that there are inherent weaknesses in the trust-based model, that's the fiat currency model, where the intermediary stands in the middle. All transactions are reversible. And even though that was a criticism laid against fiat currency, it is my view that the fact of transactions being reversible when using fiat currency is advantageous. Advantageous where you have issues of fraud, where also you have issues of human error. He said there's always the possibility of fraud where you use the traditional fiat currency model. There can always be the manipulation of the transaction for a dishonest gain, and that is true. So even when we deal with our transactions, let us say our e-commerce transactions, there's always the possibility that someone may go in, pretend to be you, and do a dishonest act to obtain an advantage. I'm not so sure if Nakamoto, I agree with Nakamoto that cryptocurrencies does not leave the door open for that, but we will discuss it further. He said financial institutions can void transactions, and that was a criticism as well on fiat currencies and the presence of the trusted third party. And transaction costs are high. These are the main weaknesses that the cryptocurrency was supposed to solve. So, create a technological product that the transactions are almost impossible to reverse. So transactions that occur on the blockchain are almost impossible to reverse. Also, because they cannot be reversed, then it is seen that there is the removal of the possibility of fraud. There's also the removal of the possibility of double spending because of the rigors in terms of the blockchain and how transactions are settled. Also, these transactions cannot be voided. So this is cryptocurrency, ladies and gentlemen, justices. Transaction cannot be voided, and the transaction costs, they say, are almost negligible, almost none, in terms of the transaction cost. And I didn't put it here, but the speed with which the transaction is settled is a lot quicker than when it goes through the intermediary or the central government. Now, you would know different governments have different time periods within transactions are settled. Some transactions may be settled within three days, some within a few hours, some almost instantaneously. But the process of settling the transaction is also allows for a process of due diligence, which I will deal with a little further in the presentation. So now, in terms of cryptocurrencies, what it facilitates, as I've said, you've taken the intermediary entirely out of the picture. This is fully peer-to-peer. That is, similarly to how we're on this platform and there are 26 persons on this platform, it can be between myself and another person on the platform, no clearinghouse, no intermediary. It facilitates direct trading, no interference of the government. And you'll see how this may prove a problem in anti-money laundering regulations and counterterrorism financing regulations. Speedy, as I said, electronic payments without institutions settling them. It is a purely technological creation. The transactions are also irreversible. Now, what I wanted to do now is I wanted to look at, I think, a video that I think explains very nicely and in a very simple way how cryptography works. We know, and I'm going to go to the video, we know, I think I have mine somewhere here. You'll forgive me. But we are accustomed to what is called a physical wallet. And this is what most of us go around with, and it has our funds, it has our cards, it has our identification information in some instances, and we're accustomed to a physical wallet. But in the blockchain technology or cryptocurrencies, there is the concept of a virtual wallet. And before I go to the video, if I may try to just give a little introduction to it, and I hope everyone is still listening and following, as I know I've been talking for quite a while.
Yes, we are.
Okay. Okay, sometimes I like to give a mental break in the middle of the presentation so that we don't get overwhelmed with information. So in terms of the physical wallet, right now, my physical wallet exists on Public Building West King Street, the address for my office. That's where I keep my wallet. Good. Now, in cryptocurrencies, the virtual wallet, when you download the software, the virtual wallet has a public address and a private address. They sometimes say public key, private key. Public code, private code. The public code is what tells you where this wallet exists. So let us say public building West King Street, but scramble it up in numbers. And that is Andrea Swaby's public address. You want to find Andrea, that is where Andrea Swaby is. But even though the wallet is there, you may know where my wallet is, but you can't go inside my wallet unless you have my private key, which is my password that opens it. So in cryptography, two passwords or two codes are issued, the public code, the private code. All transactions are public for everyone to see on the blockchain. So therefore, you will see the different addresses. This public address owns this value on the blockchain. This public address owns this value on the blockchain. But the trick is, it's pseudonymized information, because unless you know whose public code it is, you will not know that it's Andrea Swaby's wallet. You will know that Public Building West has this wallet 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But my name is not there. Backtrack now to fiat transactions. With fiat transactions, I think there's a little similarity. I have an account number. For every bank account or your credit card, you have an account number. The account number is something you can share with persons, especially if you expect persons to bring values to your account. You share your account number. But the only person who can access your account is you who has the password for it. So people can send monies to your account. You can send monies. There's no secret as to the account in your commerce, but the passwords are personal to you. Maybe that might be the closest in terms of appreciating. So I'm going to do a new share, and I hope that you will be able to watch the video and be able to appreciate. Are you seeing? Oh dear, I think that was my no, it's not. It's YouTube. I'm just gonna skip the ad. Okay. Are you seeing my screen with the asymmetric encryption?
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. All right. So just watch the video. I think it breaks it down very nicely.
Is the process of taking a message and scrambling its contents so that only certain people can look at your message. There are two types of encryption: symmetric and asymmetric encryption. Let's first take a look at symmetric encryption to understand why asymmetric encryption was created. To do that, let me introduce you to Alice and Bob. Alice has a sensitive document that she wants to share with Bob. She uses an encryption program to protect her document with a password or passphrase that she chooses. She then sends the encrypted document to Bob. However, Bob cannot open this message because he doesn't know the passphrase that Alice used to encrypt the document. In other words, he doesn't have the key to open the lock. Now comes a real problem. How does Alice share this passphrase securely with Bob? Sending it through email is risky because others might find the passphrase and use it to decrypt any messages between Alice and Bob. This is exactly the kind of problem that asymmetric encryption intends to solve. It is comparable to a mailbox on the street. The mailbox is exposed to anyone who knows its location. We can say that the location of the mailbox is completely public. Anyone who knows the address can go to the mailbox and drop in a letter. However, only the owner of the mailbox has a key to open it up and read the messages. So let's now go back to technical details. When using asymmetric encryption, both Alice and Bob have to generate a key pair on their computers. A popular and secure way for doing this is by using the RSA algorithm. This algorithm will generate a public and private key that are mathematically linked to each other. Public keys can be used to encrypt data, and only the matching private key can be used to decrypt it.
Okay, I just wanted to pause one moment. So as you can see, you're issued with two keys, a private key and a public key. Both are related to each other. So persons who purchase Bitcoin or purchase any of the others, Litecoin, whatever it is, on the market directly, you have a public and a private key, and both codes are related. As he just said, the public key that you have, the public key can be used to encrypt or scramble the message. But then you need the person, the only one who is able to unscramble is the one who has the private key. So let's continue.
Even though the keys are linked together, they cannot be derived from each other. In other words, if you know someone's public key, you cannot derive his private key. If we retake our mailbox example, then the mailbox's address would be the public key, something that everyone is allowed to know. The owner of the mailbox is the only one who has the private key, and that is needed to open up the mailbox. Let's now take a look at how Alice and Bob can use asymmetric encryption to communicate securely with each other. They start by exchanging their public keys. Bob gives his public key to Alice, and Alice gives her public key to Bob. Now Alice can send her sensitive document again. She takes the document and encrypts it with Bob's public key. She then sends the file to Bob, who uses his private key to unlock the document and read it. Because they use asymmetric encryption, only Bob is able to decrypt the message. Not even Alice can decrypt it because she doesn't have Bob's private key. The strength and security of the asymmetric encryption now relies on Alice and Bob to keep their private keys well protected. If an attacker steals Alice's private key, it can be used to decrypt all messages that are intended for Alice. However, the attacker cannot decrypt messages that were sent by Alice because that requires Bob's private key. Asymmetric encryption is used in a lot of places where security really matters. You might not be aware of it, but every time you visit a secure website via HTTPS, you're actually...
All right. So it's going into other things that we don't need to go into now. All right. So we've looked at the video, and basically what is happening is that you've replaced the trusted intermediary, and the trusted intermediary is now, what should I say? The cryptography or encryption and the mechanisms of a mathematical formula. And I know for us as attorneys, and I have to concede myself, that sometimes it's not very easy to understand a lot of these technological products and technological, what I call phenomenons. But the truth is, in the discipline of law, it's not necessary for you to understand the nitty-gritty ones and zeros. What you have to understand is how the law interfaces with the technological product. Like, for example, and as I was preparing the presentation for today, I thought about it and I said, well, I have never understood how the bank settles transactions. So the bank or the central government, they have their mechanism and method of settling. They hire actuaries and they do all sorts of things, and they use technology to do so. It's not necessarily important for the prosecutor or the judge to understand everything about the technology or the process for you to appreciate how the law interrelates with it. Yes, it's important to understand these new things in a fairly, I wouldn't say substantial, but I would say to appreciate what is happening, but more importantly, to understand how the dynamics works with the law. So as I said, think of the public key as your bank account number or your mailbox number, and the private key as the password to the account and the key that will allow you to open it. So, and I'll pick on someone here. Let us say Her Honor Miss Kemble and I want to engage in a transaction. What is important, if I am transferring Bitcoins to Her Honor Miss Kemble, then I need to know where her wallet is. I need to know that public address, because I am going to use her public address to lock up the message or lock up the value as it goes over to her. So nobody can intercept it because it's encrypted. The only person that can access that value that is sent is Miss Kemble when she uses her private key. Similarly so, if Mrs. Kemble or someone else will send over values along the blockchain, right? So as I said before, both numbers are related and they're generated together and related to each other. Now, in the discourse on cryptocurrencies, there's always a discourse about blockchain. And what is the blockchain? The blockchain is really the technology that lies at the foundation of cryptography. Now, blockchain is not just important when we think of value or money or cryptocurrency. Blockchain technology is also utilized for smart contracts, and all sorts of other types of services can be facilitated on the blockchain technology. What happens is that for every transaction, even along with Bitcoin, every transaction that is done, it forms a block that is attached to a chain. So let us say today, myself and let me not pick on Miss Kemble again. I'm going to pick on someone else. I see Justice I see the Honorable Adderley. Okay, let us say Andrea Swaby and His Honor Mr. Adderley engage in a transaction. Let us say I am sending across some Bitcoins. He's purchasing some Bitcoins from me. Now on the chain, the last transaction should show the public key for me, Andrea Swaby, that I am the one who has this value here currently. But when I transfer now to him, a new block is created along the chain. And this block is supposed to represent who owns this new value along the chain. So that's why they call it a blockchain. As the transactions are done, they're publicly seen along the chain, but you don't know who the person is because what you see reflected there are public keys and not private keys or identity. You don't see Andrea Swaby or you don't see His Honor Adderley. What you see is ones and zeros that represents public addresses. So now, this ledger exists entirely outside of a central government or authority. In fact, a central government and authority, in the same way they cannot control the internet, cannot control transactions on a blockchain. Once you have the internet, you have access to the software, you can engage in transactions between each other. The blockchain technology or distributed ledger technology allows a community of users to record transactions in a ledger that's public to the community. No transaction can be changed once it is published. And what they say is that there are people all over the world who they have nodes, they call them nodes, where their job is to work out these transactions and to settle them. It requires, they say, a lot of computing power, and they are competing to be able to settle this new transaction, to publish it on the blockchain. And I think for every transaction they do, they get some amount of value out of the transaction if you are the one who settles it. Sorry. I think my machine has seized up a little bit on me. Okay, let me try again. All right, here. Okay, good. Now the blockchain enables the users to be pseudonymous. You're only identifiable through the alphanumeric key. So if law enforcement in their investigations find out that this key belongs to Andrea Swaby, then that's good for them, because then they can associate the value with Andrea Swaby. But you'd have to figure out who is behind that key. So there's a complete transparency of transactions, but the user remains anonymous. And accounts can be created without any identification or authorization process. No, know your customer. No customer due diligence exists in blockchain technology. So the question here is this: can cryptocurrencies qualify as being able to function as fiat currency? Can it be used as a medium of exchange? Yes. Within the community, if you as a community accept that Bitcoin or one of the other cryptocurrencies is what will be used for us to exchange these goods and services, then it can function as a medium of exchange. And remember, money is a social concept. Can it function as a unit of account, a standard numerical unit for the measurement of value and costs of goods and services, or a store of value? Now, I think these two instances is perhaps where the major challenge lies with cryptocurrencies. Now, I just looked at 3 dates, didn't go back to the history of Bitcoin, but January 1, 2022, 1 Bitcoin was the value of US $47,738.59. 1 year later, January 1, 2023, 1 Bitcoin was equivalent to $16,619 US dollars and 10 cents. And then today, September 19, 2023, 27,267 and 40 cents USD is the equivalent of 1 Bitcoin. You can already see how volatile cryptocurrencies can be. And also, because it is not centralized, it's totally decentralized, there's no intermediary to step in to control or to manage the value of the currency. This can pose difficulties. Why? Because if it is so volatile, it means that tomorrow it could be valued little or nothing. And therefore, for you to properly use it as a store of value may pose difficulties, or as a unit of account. I said, yes, it can function as a medium of exchange. Now, having gone through what is money, what are cryptocurrencies, and it's being built on the blockchain technology, I wanted us to look at cryptocurrencies from the perspective of anti-money laundering regulations. And a big part of my thesis looked at this, because if we go back to the 1988 Vienna Convention, you would see that because of the ever-present threat of money laundering, that is where people will seek to sanitize their ill-gotten gains through bringing it within some sort of formal financial system, try to conceal it, they try to disguise it, they convert it and do all sorts of things to hide the illicit origin, you had the emergence of strong anti-money laundering regulations. In fact, I also looked at TCI a bit in terms of your anti-money laundering framework, and let us see how the anti-money laundering regulations may have to pivot to be able to address the new challenges that are posed by this technology. Now, pseudonymity, comes in direct conflict, in my view, with know your customer, customer due diligence, AML principles. In terms of engaging in any form of commerce or interaction with the formal financial system, know your customer, customer due diligence is very, very important. In fact, you cannot engage in transactions within the formal sector without exposing your identity. But on the blockchain technology, as I said before, your identity is a code. There are additional barriers to actually appreciate the who behind the transaction or the who behind the ownership. And that was one of the things that I think in crafting the blockchain technology and in using it for commerce, privacy was supposed to be a very important thing in terms of virtual currency developers. So even though the transactions are public, the catch was that the identities are concealed. So virtual currencies have varying degrees of anonymity. The Bitcoin is pseudonymous, as users are identified only by their public key for all transactions. And so that flies in the face of customer due diligence, know your customer, as we are accustomed to. But I wanted to say something before I move on. Also, because you have removed the intermediary, there is no body that would be responsible for managing the activities on the platform. So therefore, persons can use the platform to engage in illicit activity. And why would they not? Because let us go way back to 1988 or before 1988, when you had the emergence of narco trafficking, and it was seen that persons would be obtaining a lot of benefit, cash intensive was the narco industry, these big drug cartels. And then they would just go to the financial institutions and they would just put in the dirty money and then they would get the clean money. That was the big mischief that the Vienna Convention of 1988 wanted to solve, because they're of the view that persons were using the financial institutions to sanitize their wealth. So because of that, let us set up strong regimes in different jurisdictions where it would be difficult for someone to launder their funds through the formal system. Why? Because not only do you have customer due diligence, but you also have strict threshold reporting conditions. You have strict suspicious transaction reporting requirements. And so therefore, the formal system would now become not so attractive to the criminal in terms of sanitizing their wealth. But if now you have a technological platform where what we can do is we can trade values. We can trade values between each other using purely the internet. And the only thing they can see the big money passing. So they can see the big, huge values passing between this code and that code. but you cannot identify who the person is. Then the platform, of course, would be more attractive to individuals who want to sanitize their illicit wealth. Now, in the technology, the single public key can be used for all your transactions. But some persons, what they find is that they create multiple public keys with private keys attached. So if I create 15 public keys, it's going to be more difficult for you to tie me to all those accounts. So you may see a public key here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then a public key here, down here, 6, 4, 8, 9. And all of these are Andrea Swaby. But because I'm changing up my codes, because I have multiple codes, it's even more difficult for you to tie me to a set of values. Now, in respect of customer due diligence, the global AML regime requires the gatekeepers to identify all customers, verify their identity with passports and other forms of identification. None of this is required on the blockchain or in terms of purchasing these Bitcoins or cryptocurrencies. So now, this was Moza et al., an inquiry into money laundering tools in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And this was at an ECHME Researchers Summit in 2013. It says AML, anti-money laundering in Bitcoin, has to deal with imperfect knowledge of identities, but may exploit perfect knowledge of all transactions. So investigators have to be crafty. You don't know the identity of the person, but you can see all the transactions there, not hidden from law enforcement. So therefore, some of the tools of investigations will have to evolve as well. So what are the vulnerabilities with cryptocurrencies? And I'm going to look at a few of the cases or investigations that have occurred certainly over the past few years. So remember what Nakamoto said? Nakamoto said, don't like the traditional financial system. Take out the intermediary. Possibility of fraud. Possibility of double spending. Transactions cost too much. They can be reversed. They can be reversed. And we wanted something irreversible. But irreversibility is a double-edged sword. The fact that you cannot reverse the transaction means that if it is one that is born out of fraud, how will you be able to right the wrong? Further as well, and as we look at some of the investigations, if I lose my private key and it gets in the hands of the wrong person, then I don't have an intermediary to call to say, shut down my account. Normally, if your credit card or your debit card is compromised, you can call the bank immediately and you can say, shut down my account. It has been compromised. Who do you call if someone has hacked into your device, your computer system, and now has control of your public key, private key, interrelated codes? Those are some of the vulnerabilities. So in 2011, there was a hack of Mt. Gox Bitcoin exchange. And this resulted in a massive loss. Now, what are Bitcoin exchanges? And I'm going to deal a little bit with it because I see that in relation to Turks and Caicos, you can actually purchase Bitcoin through British crypto exchanges. So the Bitcoin exchange, I'm sorry, it operates just like your foreign exchange trader, where you can trade your value for fiat money. So it's where the Bitcoin or the cryptocurrency interfaces with the fiat currency. Now, if they have hacked into the exchange, then certainly they would have the opportunity to interfere and interface with several different accounts and values, right? Mt. Gox was the largest exchange in the world, and after the hack, they declared bankruptcy and cited losses of up to 473 million. And it's interesting because even though Nakamoto saw this emergence of blockchain technology and Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies as the panacea or something to cure the problems with the traditional system, it still has its own problems in terms of what has happened. Continuing with the vulnerability, we have Bitstamp. In January 2015, the second largest Bitcoin exchange suffered a hack. You'll see that this is what the criminals are trying to do, to hack into these exchanges. Loss of 19,000 Bitcoins, which was valued at 5.1 million US dollars. They suspended services for a week, and during that period, clients' deposits were not accessible. So they're not immune to attacks. Also similar in Bitfinex, this was a Hong Kong-based exchange, lost 119,756 Bitcoins, and you see the market value there. Now, in this case, the losses from the theft, and I've highlighted it, was apportioned across the company's clients and assets. And that's interesting because one of the advantages of having a formal financial system is that the monies and values are insured. No such thing exists in terms of the blockchain or in terms of cryptocurrency. There is no insurance. And so you can gain a lot, but you can also lose a lot. Now, also, as I touched on it before, that the technology can be used as a conduit of or for criminality. Now, Europol said this in 2016, cryptocurrencies, specifically Bitcoin, remain the currency of choice for much of cybercrime, whether it is used as payment for criminal services or for receiving payments from extortion victims. And you would have seen, certainly over the past few years, where you have a lot of ransomware attacks, that they are asking for payments in the form of Bitcoin, no doubt, because it allows for the concealment of identity. Then you had this massive investigation that occurred in the United States, Silk Road. It was highly publicized. Silk Road was a running black market or on the dark web, where persons bought drugs, false IDs, hacking tools, utilized the platform to do all manner of criminality. They exclusively used Bitcoin, which was a virtual currency, as I've said before, that offered a level of anonymity. How were they able to crack Silk Road? It was months of intense investigations. It was difficult to find out who was behind it. And due to their intelligence gathering, what they did was they actually held, his name was Dread Pirate Roberts. I think they used even his email address that he had used to set up this account and that account to try and link. So you see the hurdles that they have to go through to understand and appreciate the identity of the person behind the transaction. When they found him, they did the sting operation where he was right at the computer, right there in his on the platform, engaging in transactions. Now, cryptocurrencies, and I am going to leave a little time for questions. I know I've been talking a lot, and I hope I have not lost everybody. I know it is a lot of material. So this is also another 1 minute mental break that I'm just trying to give persons until I go back into the material. So I indicated that we wanted to look a bit at cryptocurrency and AML regulations, because cryptocurrencies are growing, its popularity, its use increases. And so even though it is not backed by a central government, it doesn't mean that we sit by and just say, well, it's here, we can't control it. In fact, in my research, the best way for you to manage cryptocurrencies is to regulate the point at which it meets fiat currency. So these exchanges will have to undergo the strict AML, customer due diligence, transaction reporting, suspicious transaction reporting, threshold transaction reporting, so that you are able to monitor where it meets with the fiat. And the truth is, at some point, the individual behind the value is going to want to bring or transfer that value or translate it or convert it to an acceptable currency. It only makes sense. Now, as I said, most of our anti-money laundering regulations follow the Vienna model, and that is the 1988 Convention against psychotropic, the illicit trade in psychotropic substances, often called Vienna Convention. Article 2 said that the purpose of the convention was to promote cooperation among the parties so that they may address the various aspects of illicit trade in narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances having an international dimension. The parties should take necessary measures, including legislative and administrative measures, in conformity with the fundamental provisions of their respective domestic legal system. Now, what did that translate to for us? That translated to the crafting of our proceeds of crime. I think in TCI, it is ordinance. Here it is act. And also, which would include all of the requirements to fulfill customer due diligence and policing of transactions. Article 7.1a said that each state party shall institute a comprehensive domestic regulatory and supervisory regime for banks, non-bank financial institutions, and other bodies which are susceptible to money laundering. And I've quoted this because wouldn't you agree that all Bitcoin exchanges are susceptible to money laundering? And they would be, because it is where you're able to convert these large values, could be small values as well, to fiat currency. And so it's because of that, and you're moving from a pseudonymous platform, it's important for you to manage the risk associated with that. And so here it said that the institutions that are susceptible to money laundering, you should have legislative, administrative things in place. Also implement the requirements for customer ID, identification, record keeping, and reporting of suspicious transactions. So I looked a little bit at the AML structure in TCI, and yes, you do have a comprehensive legislative framework, which includes your proceeds of crime ordinance, with I saw several amendments and just adjustments to bring in DNFBPs and all of that, similar to what obtains in most countries within the region. The proceeds of crime ordinance would be the main pillar of your legislative structure. And also there was a prevention of terrorism ordinance as well, and several attendant legislations that both amend and also specifically treat with different key players in the financial system. Yes, the TCI does follow the international standards in line with the Vienna approach for regulation and supervision. Now, what has CFATF said about new technologies like this? If we look at recommendation 15 of the CFATF, you see that it treats with new technologies. Now, I noted that in relation to TCI, it was deemed that TCI was partially compliant with recommendation 15. But I'm sure, I didn't go back into my paper to look at it, but I'm sure Jamaica is perhaps in the same boat in terms of how strict these requirements and regulations are. But when you look at CFATF, what it said is that VASPs, that's virtual asset service providers, which are like your Bitcoin exchanges, they must be brought within the ambit of your regulatory framework. So all the customer due diligence mechanisms are supposed to be carried out by your virtual asset service providers. In fact, I'm so sorry. When I studied the JSE and the framework here in terms of introducing trading in virtual assets, similarly so, the brokerage firms would be the virtual asset service providers, and they would be brought within the regime of customer due diligence. So what did recommendation 15 say of the CFATF? It encouraged countries and financial institutions to identify and assess the money laundering and terrorist financing risks which may arise in relation to the development of new products and the use of new or developing technologies for new and existing products. The FATF was careful to note that such risk assessment should be done prior to the launch of the new product or the use of the new or developing technology. And that was one of the things that I explored in my paper, that if you follow CFATF, the regulations must go before the actual amendment or the actual, introduction of the new products and new technology, not after. And so because of that, it is important that whatever new technology is being embraced, certainly as a basis of commerce, then the regulatory framework must be in place. It says Jamaica was rated as being compliant with recommendation 15 in 2017, and that was before there was any talk of introducing virtual asset trading. The CFATF, and just one minute, please. The CFATF offered guidance in respect of virtual assets. It stated that managing the risks which arise from virtual assets, as I said before, the framework should focus on VASPs, and the latter should be regulated for AML/CFT purposes and licensed and registered and subject to the regime. As I said, how would we regulate cryptocurrencies? Regulate, as I said, at the point where it interfaces with your fiat currency. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know I have been speaking for quite a while, and I wanted to have a discussion segment. That is the end of the presentation. So as we said, starting, money, we define it by what it does. Medium of exchange, unit of account, store of value. Money is a social concept, so it will continue to evolve as society evolves. So in the early days, several generations before, it was barter system, then it went to commodities, then it went to commodities that are backed commodities or backed by the community. Community has confidence. Fiat currency is one such representation of commodities that are backed by the community, meaning the government and the society as a whole. But there are new forms of payment methods that emerge. Yes, there is the emergence of e-commerce, but still backed by fiat currency. Credit card transactions, online payment mechanisms, all of them are backed. But there's now this new technology emerging where it is totally decentralized. Transactions are done peer-to-peer. It's pseudonymous, no intermediary. Also, transactions are settled purely with technology and mathematical calculations. This new phenomenon, if I may be bold enough to say, is something that we have to embrace. When Nakamoto did his white paper in 2009, and 2009 is now 14 years behind us, we still have cryptocurrencies that are doing very well, albeit that the values are volatile. But persons are increasingly using it for legitimate, but also illegitimate purposes, and governments need to be prepared to handle it. But we as practitioners as well, we also ought to have an appreciation, because you may find that you, in your criminal prosecutions and adjudication, you may find that new payment methods may emerge in terms of how persons sought to conceal their wealth or sought to convert the criminal property. And so it is important for us to ensure that we have some sort of framework in place as well to seek to address some of the concerns that may emerge in the use of cryptocurrencies. Thank you very, very much. I think I am 13 minutes early, but if you have any questions, I am happy to discuss.
Good morning, Ms. Martin Swaby. Thank you for that very, very informative presentation. And we'll now open the floor to questions. Please feel free as well to leave any questions you have in the chat if you're shy, so that we can read it aloud. So good morning again, Justices of Appeal and judges of the Supreme Court and magistrates. So we await your questions. Thank you. Ms. Martin Swaby, you're muted.
Yes, I was muted. I was just reading the chat and I said, thank you. Excellent question. I see a question in the chat. What determines the value of cryptocurrency? Now, because there is no intermediary that manages the value, it is purely a demand and supply situation. And so because of that, you'll see that the value tends to fluctuate, in my view, violently. Because if you noted at the beginning of last year, it was valued, I think, at 40-something thousand US$ to one. And then by the beginning of this year, it was almost halved or more than halved in terms of the value. And so it is quite volatile. And because of that, when I did my research, and you speak to persons in the private sector and also regulators, a lot of persons within the formal system discouraged the use of cryptocurrencies because there's no one there to pull the strings together to manage its value. And so because of that, how do you use it as a strong unit of account to store value? Yes, thank you, Justice Laban Jackson, for that question. It doesn't seem that there are any other questions. I know that in my research, I was trying to see if in TCI they are also seeking to introduce the trading of digital currencies or virtual assets on the stock exchange or so, but I wasn't, the most I was able to see is that you had the opportunity to purchase and to sell Bitcoins on virtual exchanges. Yes, another question that Justice Laban Jackson has asked is, what are some of the challenges in catching criminals since the ID is private? And that was what was seen primarily in the Silk Road investigation in the United States. It was very difficult for them to catch. I think his name was Greg, I don't know what his name was. His name escapes me now. But because of the pseudonymized material or information, what they had to do was to see what email account was used on the platform to set up the account. Then they had to look back to see what email account, if it was the same email account used for social media accounts. They had to use different forms of investigative tools to try to piece together who the person was behind the code. What I have learned is that law enforcement, particularly in the United States, they have, invested a lot of time and effort in terms of studying the blockchain, studying the addresses and trying to decipher who these persons are. Because the truth is, it's not fully anonymized. It's just partially anonymized, but it just requires extra work to be able to identify who the person is behind the actual account. And thanks for that question again, Justice Jackson.
I have a question. Mm-hmm. The collapses of these exchanges that we hear about, like the FTX exchange, is it primarily fraud cases that you see coming out of those types of collapses? And is that something that can impact a jurisdiction such as TCI, where we incorporate overseas companies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, certainly, and those cases, were particularly hacks. So it's persons who actually hacked into the accounts, gained access to the information and the values that existed at these exchanges. And so I wouldn't call it necessarily a fraud, even though it can be categorized as a fraud in its purest sense. When I think of computer-related fraud, I think of, and let us work it through. It's where a dishonest act is done, and the dishonest act is done for gain or the intention to gain. So even traditional frauds, and you have the intention to cause loss. So if it fits within that umbrella, then yes, it is a computer-related fraud. But you could also charge them for unauthorized access, which is where you gain access to the computer system without having any authorization. But then as well, when you gain the access in, like, for example, with Mt. Gox and those other companies, you then would have obtained an advantage. So it can come under either of them, I suppose, either your unauthorized access or also your computer-related frauds.
Thank you.
If I may add to that, the FTX, as you know, collapsed in the Bahamas last November. Mm-hmm. And the liquidation and the criminal cases are still ongoing.
Yeah.
There's liquidation in the Bahamas and also in the United States, and there's quite a fight. But in all of these exchanges, what seems to be the problem is the basic, despite the technology, the basic principles of securities regulations.
Yes.
One is breached. In other words, most of them, the cases involve mixing clients' funds with the operators' funds, or there being a lack of transparency by not producing the accounts so that the regulators could look at them, or a lack of internal governance in the institutions. And these are the basic things which regulators try to look at and to nip them in the bud when they see them. And all of the collapses seem to have those three general principles breached. And but I want to congratulate the speaker. It was very clear and very accurate, and it identified a lot of the problems. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, His Honor Adderley.
Thank you.
If I may, Miss Martin Selby, and may I just add to his lordship's, it was brilliantly done. It was very easy to understand. Having very little knowledge of the subject matter, it was easy to follow. But is it possible then that to stop some of the volatility that you mentioned in it, is it not possible to peg it to maybe, as you call them, the fiat currencies, to the fiat money, in that can you do that then? Say that, for example, we peg it to, not like the old days when you had a gold standard, but you peg it to something to give it some stability, to say that, I don't know what you can peg it to, but would that be possible at all?
So you're saying, because right now its value is related to the US dollars or US dollar, right? But when you say peg, what do you mean?
Well, if not to the volatility seems to be a supply and demand issue. So if from the stats you won Bitcoin in 2022 and 2023, and then it seems to go up so rapidly. And now it can't be fully pegged to the US in the sense that that is not how the dollar it's moved. That is how obviously the supply and demand chain are interlinked. So is there any other way to make it more stable, put it to something that will, at least when you, I don't know, buy Bitcoin, you have a general idea that it will not move more than a particular, like a normal currency then. Like a normal currency will fluctuate in the vicissitudes of the market based on not only supply, demand, but inflation, based on, the various denominators that back currency, right? So is there no way of doing that, making it linked to something then that will give it some stability?
The only issue that I foresee is, to do that, then you would have to have some sort of an intermediary that would be able to assert that power in relation to managing the value of it. And how it is constructed currently, it's really entirely a technological construct. Nobody has any authority to interfere, even to interfere to say, this is what the Bitcoin or the Litecoin should be valued. And it shouldn't go above here or below there. The issue also with cryptocurrencies, and I'm going to use Bitcoin as an example, is that it's not an indefinite amount. There is actually a cap on it as well, of how many Bitcoins can ever be issued on the algorithm. So it is entirely managed by a computer process. I don't know if there is any move or attempt to necessarily peg it, because, as I said, it's completely decentralized. No government can assert any more authority or less authority than anyone else, because the truth is, it's really on a technological platform.
If I could just add a little to that, I don't want to get into it in any details, except to say that you're quite right. They tried to stabilize it by what they call algorithms. In other words, they had an algorithm that tried to stabilize it. But those coins, which were called stable coins, that didn't work. However, there is they do produce what they call stable coins, which are linked, for example, to the US dollar, for example. So they in the financial transactions, they try to get around it to some extent by the use of stable coins. And I don't really want to try to attempt to go into the details of that, but it's mitigated to a certain extent by use of stable coins.
Okay. Okay. I see a hand up, but I also see a question, but I will let my moderator manage that. I won't encroach on his job
Yes,
and function.
I was going to say, we can take the question from Justice Grishow first, and then we can take the question from Ms. Mills. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thank you. Can I just say congratulations on a excellently put forward presentation that was very understandable. I've been on a number of these presentations and never really lasted much more than the first 5 or 10 minutes. But can I just ask, in relation to the anonymity, how do I get a Bitcoin? I must presumably have to purchase that, and to do that, have what you're describing as fiat cash. So if I'm using that, surely there must be a trace of my transaction to buy that Bitcoin. And presumably I could only accumulate large quantities of Bitcoin by illicit transactions, by trading drugs, for example, and be paid in Bitcoin. But then when I want to use that in any kind of real way, don't I need to put that back into the fiat currency? So that would then have to go back into a normal banking system. So therefore that would be traceable back to you.
Okay, so should I go ahead, Judge? So in terms of, firstly, you'd have to download the software to be able to engage on the blockchain. But then you have Bitcoin exchanges where you can actually go to purchase Bitcoin, but you can also purchase the Bitcoin on the platform itself by trading values. But at some point, someone is going to need to exchange it. You have even ATMs as well, where you can actually exchange Bitcoins for fiat currencies. So there are different mechanisms by which the cryptocurrency has to interface with the fiat currency. And that is why they say the best way to treat with anti-money laundering regulations is to address those points of exchange. Because apart from you being able to exchange it, you're literally just sending codes around. Somebody's going to have to cash that out at some point. You said about illicit trade, but people actually do use it for legitimate purposes as well. In fact, they were saying that Bitcoin has value because in certain countries or territories where you may need to trade in certain things, that maybe the government does not allow it, and it's territories, for example, that are under very strict rules, etc., where you may need to be able to engage in certain commerce, and those politically, for want of a better word, blacklisted territories where you may need to engage, you may need to ensure that persons are able to engage in certain transactions. So it can be used for legitimate purposes as well, and at the same time illegitimate. But at some point, even if I say, Justice Grishow, I'm sending over, or I am trading 50,000 Bitcoins on the software, it's just like the central bank system where you're moving around figures, but at some point you're going to have to cash it out. And that is where the AML regulation has to be present at those points. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. The other question, how have law enforcement and prosecutors approached conspiracies involving the money laundering of Bitcoin currency, given the challenges? So as I discussed Silk Road, which was one of the major investigations and ultimately prosecutions that occurred, the thing is to find out the who behind the transaction. And that takes a lot of investigations and a lot of analysis and studying of the movements of individuals. In fact, one of the ways they also held the accused in that matter was that they studied his pattern, the IP address that was used. And it was found that the same IP address was used on multiple occasions when he was engaged on the platform trading in Bitcoins. The IP address was actually linked to a cafe in his community. And they studied the movement, studied it, did their surveillance. And as I said, when they held him right then and there in the cafe on the computer system. Because the truth is, with criminals, especially where you have these transnational organized and conspiracy related offenses, criminals will develop some sort of a pattern. Just like how in your investigation, let us say you find some data on a device, and let's say it's a child pornography investigation or something like that. And let us say that during your investigations, you see that the person is usually on the site 10 in the night to 12 in the night or so, and that's what your investigation shows you. When you actually hold the device, you see that the device belongs to the mother or grandmother or something like that. Then you are gonna have to create a nexus between that device and the actual perpetrator, but you study the pattern to say, well, I mean, the grandmother is half blind or not so well and not so whatever. Would she be up 11 to 2 o'clock in the morning every night, scrolling through child pornography? So you use different soft and hard skills in investigations to try to pin down the who behind the activity. Okay.
All right, thank you. We have a second question. It's from Justice Silachan. How in general have the courts approached the issue of jurisdiction where there's a dispute with respect to cryptocurrency?
And when you say dispute, you mean I am disputing the legitimacy of a transaction? That's what you mean? Because one of the issues as well with cryptocurrencies is that they're totally irreversible. And that's one of the issues that separates it from fiat currencies. And so in terms of disputes concerning or reversibility, that is not possible at all. But when you deal with, so you're asking jurisdiction. Explain what you're talking about when you say jurisdiction and disputes.
Good morning. Excellent presentation. There may be some sort of, whether it be a contractual dispute or something like that, between private parties. So the question arises, which country which has the proper jurisdiction, because there may be an entity that is involved that may be in a third jurisdiction, and then the parties A and B may belong to separate jurisdictions. So generally, what has been the approach in terms of determining where litigation should commence?
Okay. The best answer I could give you is looking back at traditional jurisdiction rules and principles. So, like, for example, if you look at most of the UN models, whether you look at UNCAC or UNTOC, and now we're drafting a cybercrime treaty, you base jurisdiction one where it affects a person in your jurisdiction, and the person can extend to a legal person as well, if the perpetrator is a national of your state. So I would try to answer that to look at the traditional bases for jurisdiction. So if the company is incorporated in your territory and that is the company that suffers a loss, but I think these would more be inter partes matters, in terms of me saying, well, this cryptocurrency transaction that was done, I'm disputing that that somebody stole my thing, or I don't know. I imagine that it probably would more be inter partes in that regard. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question. And it's as regards NFTs and allegations that are used for money laundering, is that credible or is that just like hearsay or discussion? Similar to Bitcoin, where their values are very artificial. Is it that they're inflated to facilitate money laundering, or again, that's just gossip or hearsay from persons not in the industry? You're muted, Ms. Martin-Swavey.
Yeah, I couldn't say that the values are manipulated and are inflated, or persons play around with the value of the Bitcoin or the cryptocurrency. The truth is, because of how difficult it is to settle transactions by having the adequate computing power, it's hard for anybody to manipulate the system. And that is how it is set up. So they said that, to settle, you have people all over the world who have nodes, and they try to, a transaction is taking place on the platform. They're trying to figure it out, do the arithmetics to then publish it, be the first to publish it on the platform as the settled transaction. Because it's a competition as well, it is said that it would have to be where all these nodes come together and they contrive to mess up the system, or to, as you would say, try to interfere with the value, etc. But because it's also a money-making thing that you want to be the one to settle the transaction, it's hard for you to find where they would all come together to try to collude. That's the argument out there regarding Bitcoin. Nobody has the authority or the space to manipulate it. I think its biggest vulnerability is where somebody hacks into probably your computer system and gets control of your private key. Then no, that person has the authority to engage in transactions supposedly on your behalf. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Also, are there any more questions from the audience?
Sorry.
Yes, was there a question? Well, if there are no further questions, I would now like to turn us over to Ms. Tanya Carter, the Executive Director, who will give a formal vote of thanks to Ms. Martin-Swavey for this most excellent presentation. Before I do so, I'm going to ask everyone to please complete the short feedback survey, which I will share in the chat. So I now hand you over to Ms. Tanya Carter.
Good morning, everyone. To Ms. Andrea Martin-Swavey, we say thank you very much for what was quite a detailed and informative session, which gave us a better understanding of what blockchain and cryptocurrency are all about and the workings of same. Your presentation has no doubt given us a better appreciation of how these technological products work, as well as their vulnerability and challenges. Further, it has given us an appreciation for how these products interface with the law, and not just for the understanding of attorneys and those in the legal profession, but it also extends itself to other professions such as banking and law enforcement. Again, we say thank you for what was a very holistic, and we cannot underscore how excellent of a presentation it was. So on behalf of the JEI, thank you very much. And I now hand you back over to Mr. Emmanuel.
Thank you very much, Ms. Carter. And that brings this morning's proceedings to an end. So we thank you all for attending, and we look forward to everyone's attendance at this afternoon's seminar. Thank you very much, everyone.